Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you all to our uh, women's rights program in the 21st century. And it's a pleasure for me to talk to you today regarding being a voice for the voiceless, women who are abused, persecuted, and oppressed as we speak. We are here to recognize that women are worthy of respect and love, who are our spouses, our sisters, our mothers and daughters. And we are here to voice their voices, their voiceless voices, and to recognize their worth and their preciousness. And right now, I just want to introduce to you our MC, Betty Cruz. Betty Cruz assumed the role of President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh in January 2020. Prior to joining the council, Betty served as the leader of Change Agency, a social enterprise which she founded in 2016, and project director for All, an immigrant inclusion initiative. Betty has extensive experience in community outreach, communications, partnership building, and program management, spanning nearly 20 years. She's developed citywide initiatives for Pittsburgh Mayor William Peduto, managed mayor accounts for a national nonprofit dedicated to building playgrounds across the US, and supported public relations for global brands representing a wide range of industries. Betty Cruz, it's good to see you here today. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Shebnem. Thank you so much to the City of Bridges Foundation. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. Happy International Women's Day. I hope you all have been feeling the energy around all of us across the world on the important contributions of women throughout history and presently. And I'm so honored to be here with amazing women speakers who we're all going to get to hear from today. While we celebrate women today, we know that the work is far from over. We are all working hard to advance equity in this world, to make it brighter for our families, for our neighbors, for our community, for the entire world. So it's my honor to be here with all of you today. Our program, for everyone who's tuning in, and I know there's folks joining us from around the world. I'm here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but some of our speakers are located in many different cities, as well as many of you who are joining us today. And so that you know what to expect, we're going to hear from our wonderful panelists, and each one is going to speak on a specific topic that is part of their work, part of their passion, part of their calling, and they're going to share some insight with you today. And we'll move through each of the panelists and then bring everyone together to go through some questions from the audience. So thank you again. And first off, we're going to start with Sister Susan Sussany. And it's my pleasure to get to introduce each of these wonderful women. And I'll give you a little bit of a bio for each as we then turn over the stage to them. So Sister Suzanne Sussany is a sister of St. Francis, and she's also an immigration attorney. For most of her religious life, Sister Suzanne has ministered with the Hispanic and Latinx community in Puerto Rico, Ohio, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. Sister has said, "I wanted to work with the immigrants," she says, "all immigrants, documented and undocumented." In 2011, Sister Suzanne strengthened her ability to help when she earned a law degree. "I saw good moral people with families being picked up and put in jail, and I wanted to help. This is what Jesus would do and what I'm called to do. Being able to serve others in exactly the way I wanted to is in the hand of God and not a coincidence." Those are Sister's words. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Sister Suzanne, please take it away.
It really is a pleasure for me to be here. As Betty mentioned, I am an immigration attorney as well as a sister, and this is what enables me to work with the poor. So all of my work is really with pro bono or reduced fee. I do a lot of work with asylum. Someone asked me, well, what's the most difficult part of being an immigrant? For me, it's trying to navigate the legal system, because the legal system is so detailed and it's so easy to run afoul if you don't know what you're doing. This presents really a big problem for immigrants. Even those who are documented have to stay in status to be able to change. Those who do not have documents, those who are looking for asylum, for example, which is a large part of what I do, the system is superbly complicated. Asylum applicants need to put their application in within a year. Now, those who are very educated, and here again, I've worked with the Turkish community. Those asylum speakers are on the whole very educated. They could be engineers, they could be doctors. They have a very fine background. I've also worked with those from Central America. The ones from Central America have far less education. Women often are almost illiterate. And so a woman coming and asking for asylum might have a credible fear interview. Now that's just a first step. That's not the asylum application. But many of the women think that that's the application and that's all there is to it. So they never apply within a year because they thought they already did. So the technicalities of the legal system are very, very stringent. Besides that, the United States culture complicates all of the legal proceedings. For example, everything must be in English. Those who do not have a good command of English are really, really at a loss. And those who know no English, why, I have some asylum applicants who don't even know Spanish. I'm fortunate that I do know Spanish and can often help them. But those, for example, from Guatemala that speak a dialect, many of these dialects are not even written. So it's very, very difficult for them to present an affidavit or a declaration talking about what kind of persecution they have undergone. The educational level is just absolutely crucial in this matter. Besides that, the cultures from which the applicants are coming often clash with our own culture. The Central Americans are often coming from a culture that is highly machista. Now, machista means that the male is given preference. The male is dominant. The male is considered more important. That's absolutely against what we're here today to talk about. The idea that the women have no value. And in many cases, this is true. One of my clients just said the other day, well, yes, you know, I was like 6 months pregnant with my child. And the father of my child asked, well, is it a boy or girl? When I told him it was a girl, he left me. He said, that's not my child. If it were my child, it would be a boy. So he left her. She continued to carry the child. And along with it, she needed to carry all of the burdens, the economic, the job burdens, the childcare burdens that a child brings with it when the wonderful act of birth brings a child into the world. And the boy went off, shall we say, scot-free. We here in the United States have even used the cliche, well, boys will be boys, which I'm not sure the context of that, but to me, it does not sound like women are valued or given the human dignity that each of us deserves, because God, whomever God is for each of us, has brought this new life in us into the world. Besides this, there are the economic burdens. As women come in to apply in the United States for either documented or undocumented work, typically the work that women are given is of lesser earning power. So they're the cleaners. They clean the motels, they clean people's houses. They're the service providers. They serve in restaurants. They cook. They wash the dishes. They are unable to access a higher paying job as the men are in construction, where they go out and sometimes they actually are earning double what the women are earning. To complicate things further for women, their time frame of work is often less, simply because they might be a single mother and they need to be home to take care of their children, to feed them, to bathe them, to ask about their schoolwork, to make sure they have everything that they need, to wash their clothes. And of course, none of that is paid in many, many senses. It is not valued as it should be. And so all of these different things, the language, the education level of the person who is coming in, the machismo, the negativity that acts against the woman being able to access her total potential, her total power, to develop her skills. All of this is lacking. Even in the United States, we talk about income inequality as we measure what men earn for the same work that women will be doing, the comparison of the higher wages. And so we find that today, that is World Women's Day, this day is very important for us here in the United States to allow women, and particularly immigrants who are just getting on their feet, who are just moving on, to foster everything that will allow them to be the people that shine, the people that God has given gifts and talents to serve all of humanity, to serve all of humankind. And that's improving those things will help to navigate this legal system that is so difficult.
So complicated indeed. Thank you, sister, for that beautiful message and important words. We'll come back to you a little later after we hear from our other panelists and their remarks. Hafza Girdap is up next. Hafza is the executive director for Advocates of Silence Turkey. Hafza is pursuing her PhD in Women's and Gender Studies at Stony Brook University in New York, and her research area is human and women's rights in Muslim contexts, integration and adaptation of Muslim immigrant women, along with the issue of redefinition of their cultural identities. She's also a founding member of Set Them Free platform, who works for the women's rights violated, who works to shed light on women's rights violated, particularly in Turkey. She's a volunteer in different human rights organizations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. She's given Sufism and women's rights or human rights courses at Emory University in continuous education. Hafza has also given speeches at several conferences, including the UNGA, UNCSW, as well as World Affairs Council Peace Conference about ongoing human rights violations in Turkey, mostly focusing on women's experiences and enforced migration. Hafza has a personal motto in her life, which is let dreams lead you. She has a dream of running towards her ideal wherever and whenever possible. Hafsa lives in Long Island, New York, with her 2 daughters and her husband. Hafsa, please take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me in this, great, amazing program with amazing women. I'm Hafza Girdap. I was a teacher and international programs coordinator back in Turkey and have been living in the United States since July 2016, which means I came here because of the political conflict in Turkey that happened in 2016. And as I said, I'm very happy and honored to be here with you. So today's topic is being a woman in the context of conflicts and persecution. Women's issues and women's rights have always been controversial in terms of their dynamics in specific contexts as well as in the universal arena. And in Muslim context, particularly, the political actors claim sovereign power and legitimacy for this power through many different discourses while making claims for human and women's rights. Furthermore, state policies and political agendas tend to control women and issues related to women. Increased violence against women during and after conflicts is clearly revealed in a report that was issued by former Secretary General Kofi Annan to the United Nations Security Council. Annan states that women and children are disproportionately targeted in contemporary armed conflicts and constitute the majority of all victims. In other words, the most vulnerable victims of wars and conflicts are women. They are used as proxies, assaulted, oppressed, and discriminated. And when it comes to Turkey case, a reality of cruel violations of women's basic rights is encountered widely. I have to say that women's rights have never been truly enjoyed in Turkey. Moreover, women have always been subjugated, discriminated, and oppressed by the social, institutional, and structural actors predominantly. The laws are not properly implemented to protect women or to recognize their rights. Since July 15, 2016, Turkey's already eroding democratic mechanisms have started to collapse because of the government's authorities' collective persecution of all political dissidents and critics. Almost 130,000 people were dismissed from their jobs by emergency decrees, and those dismissed include a substantial number of women. Furthermore, the government's harsh persecution has reached the lives of thousands of women, along with their infants and children in many cases. The current administration uses arbitrary arrests and lengthy pretrial detentions to imprison courageous women who have opposed oppression in their own capacities. And today, according to our organization's reports and also to the reports of many other human rights organizations, intergovernmental organizations, along with the reports of the State Department here in the United States, the number of women arbitrarily incarcerated as political prisoners is more than 5,000, with a devastating increase in the number of new victims. Among those persecuted are more than 700 mothers who have been imprisoned with their infants and numerous others who have been violently separated from their children. In Turkey, imprisoned women and prisoners of conscience in particular live in unsanitary prisons and are denied their right to nutritional food, access to basic and complex healthcare, and feminine hygiene products. According to the Bangkok rules that were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2010, non-custodial sentences for pregnant women and women with dependent children shall be preferred, according to the Rule 64. In spite of these considerable rules and laws about the pregnant woman and women in postpartum period, there have been several incidents of violence against women and ill treatment of women in prisons. Additionally, Turkey also signed and ratified CEDAW, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, in 1985. However, most of the articles in this convention are being violated by Turkish authorities. Among these rights that are violated are right to fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other fields. And according to the CEDAW, again, women in state parties must be ensured and with appropriate services in connection with pregnancy, confinement, and the postnatal period. It is also reported by the Stockholm Center for Freedom that, and it's an advocacy organization, that the Turkish government's persecution of critics have systematically and deliberately targeted vulnerable groups, such as women, children, in order to apply undue pressure on men who are forced to sign false confessions even though they have not committed any crime. And also that the abuse of women and children ranges from sexual abuse to physical torture and ill-treatment. Pregnant, elderly, and sick women or women with babies were denied effective access to health care. Their visitation rights were ignored, and they were threatened with the persecution of other family members, including their children. Moreover, discrimination and violence against women, including femicide, have risen drastically. In 2012, 300 women, actually more than 300 women, but this is the statistical number, were killed. There is an organization, We Will Stop Femicide organization, based in Turkey, stated in their 2012 report that the year of 2012 ended with an extraordinary period, that with the prevalent coronavirus pandemic across the world and Turkey. According to this period, according to this report, with the extraordinary precautions taken against extraordinary conditions, everyone has stayed home, which has resulted in the fact that the conditions for women were worsened. On top of all aforesaid, political conflict, which is extremely impactful on women, domestic violence has desperately increased. Furthermore, Turkey's government, or I should say Turkey's staggering authoritarian regime, let the conflicting atmosphere and misogynists and opponents of equality open up the Istanbul Convention for discussion through a so-called religious discourse. Istanbul Convention is an international convention. Turkey is a state party which has to recognize and protect women's rights, actually. And the attacks on the convention have increased again, according to the We Will Stop Femicide report. International community has frequently expressed concerns about human rights issues in Turkey, especially in the last decade. The regime has not abandoned its attitude, relying on its consolidated power. To the 2010 CEDAW Turkey Shadow report declared that the increasing conservatism in Turkey, the political Islam, in Turkey during the reporting period poses a threat to women's ability to enjoy their rights and freedoms. I need to clarify here that we need to read the term increasing conservatism again, once more, highlighting the rising political Islam, and it's used as a proxy by the regime. In such an environment, laws are not properly implemented to protect women against violence, oppression, or even to recognize their basic rights. I have communicated with a lot of women because of my research in the university and also within my human rights work at Advocacy of Silence Turkey. I recall a woman, now an asylum here in the United States. She could not herself crying while telling about her fear of, being detained, where women are sexually harassed and even raped when she still was back in Turkey. She, just like thousands of other immigrant women, initially did not want to leave Turkey, but having dreaded with the news regarding, aforementioned cases in detentions, she eventually decided to migrate. In other words, the only motive behind her immigration was the ongoing sexual harassment and rape cases in detentions and jails. So as a result of all these, cases all those cases of violence, persecution, oppression, dissidents, including thousands of women, were forced to make a choice. First, stay in Turkey and face these circumstances, or second, lead the country to an unknown future in terms of economy, occupation, and living standards. Why are hundreds of people, risking their lives to get away from their countries? Imagine that they are leaving because they don't have the passports. Passports are confiscated by the regime, so they have to leave the country illegally. I'm wrapping it up. The answer is actually very simple. They are indeed socially or civilly dead. Thousands of people were dismissed from their jobs, both from governmental institutions or private companies. They cannot work anywhere else since there is a great prejudice and hatred. This pressing atmosphere is created against them through media, propaganda, which leads to exclusion, stigmatization, isolation from the society because of the government's oppressive approach. So to wrap it up, I would like to say that we as Advocates of Silence Turkey stand for human rights and the rights of the women who are victims of discrimination, violence, and persecution in Turkey by means of submitting our reports or individual cases to intergovernmental bodies such as United Nations or related committees or European Court of Human Rights. Also by means of protests, books, papers, exhibitions, we demand proper implementation of laws which recognize and protect the women's rights and well-beings, along with our, hundreds of volunteers across the world. At this point, I want to mention a very recent work, a book which I am the editor, The Baby in the Bag, which you will have a close insight to the human rights violations in Turkey, as well as their impact on people's lives through reading through life stories. And as Advocates of Silence Turkey, we have been interviewing people, mostly women, who are exposed to persecution in Turkey. So far, hundreds of people have been interviewed. And this book, let me show you. This book, The Baby in the Bag, is a compilation of 4 riveting first-hand accounts of them who fled the persecution. As the final words, I'd like to take this opportunity, I'd like to take this moment to tell you on behalf of hundreds of other volunteers in our organization, also on behalf of the persecuted women with whom I'm in close contact for my academic work or researches, how much I appreciate and how grateful I am to you for your concern and support for human rights, women's rights.
Thank you, Hafsa. What incredible, shocking numbers. And looking forward to digging into a little bit more of that. I'm sure many in our audience were taking note of these just staggering numbers. Julie, next up, we'd love to hear from you, Julie Millsap, Communications Director of Campaign for Uyghurs, who's joining the program today. And Julie joined the organization after moving back to the United States from China. She began her involvement advocating for Uyghurs after witnessing human rights atrocities during her time living overseas. Her background is in political science and education management, and she currently lives in Texas with her family. Julie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me today. I'm very grateful to be in the company of these wonderful women. And I'm very honored also to be raising this really important topic on International Women's Day. I am here substituting for Ms. Ruhsan Abbas, who is scheduled to appear and unfortunately due to health hasn't been able to, but I would just count myself as very privileged to be working with such wonderful and inspirational women on a regular basis. So for those who might be a little bit unfamiliar with the situation that I'm actually going to be discussing today, I wanted to give a brief summary. At this point in time, there are more than 50 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Turkic peoples who are being held in the Chinese regime's modern-day concentration camps, reportedly even with crematoria built nearby. This is a massive human rights crisis, and as you might imagine, affects women in particularly brutal ways. People are being detained based on their ethnic identity who have committed no crime. Many more are enslaved in factories across China where they manufacture medical equipment and goods for brands that we all know and use, such as Nike, IKEA, Coca-Cola, and many more. Their children are taken to state-run orphanages where they're forced to speak Mandarin and abandon their own mother tongue and cultural identity. This is active genocide. It seems unimaginable that such horrors could be the reality for millions of people today, and even more sadly so, that many in the international community have remained silent, particularly as concerns the brutalities against women. As women are brutalized in particularly horrific ways, it seems almost hard to believe. As child bearers, they are targeted in order to exterminate the next generation. Women who have come out of the camps have testified to gang rape, torture, mental, physical, and sexual abuse. And if you've seen the recent reporting by BBC and CNN about these atrocities, it is hard to even get through reading the details. Many who are even outside of these camp environments are also being forced into marriages with Han Chinese men, unable to refuse because they might be labeled as extremists. This is a form of government-sponsored rape. They've had their bodies and their fertility controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, and they are subject to forced abortion, sterilization, and mandatory birth control. This is not an exaggeration, it is happening, and it's very important that we as women and allies of women recognize why. Philip Gorovich wrote once in his book, and I love to quote this because it's very important in giving context. He wrote about the Rwandan genocide that genocide, after all, is an exercise in community building. We should all understand and take to heart what he means by this. The dehumanization of others requires specific planning, group thought, and in a sense, stirring up the worst parts of human nature. The Chinese regime itself has publicly tweeted and spoken in press conferences in ways that blatantly dehumanize Uyghur women, Kazakh women, referring to them as baby-making machines, publicly choosing to denounce testimony from camp victims rather than by countering with facts. They've chosen to slander them, attack their reputations, accuse them of having sexually transmitted diseases, and basically effectively slut shame them. This is not the behavior of a civilized government. And so how can any with a conscience stay silent on these atrocities, let alone organizations that claim to care for women? We have seen some very positive steps on the part of the international community, but unfortunately they are what might be considered very late. We've also seen, unfortunately, very disturbing confirmation of the complicity and the willful ignorance on the part of the international community, as well as even outright genocide apologism on the part of many. You may have heard the example of how the movie Mulan was filmed in East Turkistan, as the Uyghurs call their homeland. The Chinese regime calls it the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which is an insulting name to Uyghurs because the name in Mandarin Chinese means new territory, when in fact this is their historic homeland. So they prefer to use East Turkestan. And Disney chose this as a location while genocide was already occurring. The movie even thanked the Public Security Bureau that's responsible for putting out propaganda and indeed carrying out the extrajudicial brutal detainment and torture of Uyghurs. They are the actors carrying out this genocide and constructing propaganda to lie about their brutalization of women in particular. The question that should be asked for all of us right now is how much more will we continue to let companies and corporations get away with this type of not just complacency, but outright complicity, while they claim to represent a woke segment of society or to have these progressive views on women. Unfortunately, Disney is just one small example of many. And while we see all these examples, we also need to ask, where is the UN? Where is UN Women? Where are the feminist organizations to speak out for these women who are being targeted in such brutal ways? And adding insult to injury, we really see that the international community continues to make addressing these atrocities very unnecessarily political. It's not really a political issue, and it shouldn't be framed as a purely political conversation. It is a massive human rights issue, and addressing it falls under the political realm in some instances, but it should not become prey to partisan politics. Therefore, it's very important for us to keep in mind what it means to address these atrocities, and that we should continue to praise right action regardless of which political party is initiating it. Here in the US, we have a very divided political climate at present, but there has been really uncommon and rare bipartisan support for the Uyghur cause and Uyghur women. And that is just because the nature of these atrocities is really undeniably cruel and horrific. It really continues to be an urgent need to have action to hold the regime accountable and to make this action unilateral. And part of that needs to be magnifying the voices of women and empowering them and supporting them. We are still desperately in need of more decisions to address the genocide to be made by leaders in many nations, but there have been some steps forward. And as for the why part of why these atrocities are happening, unfortunately, we've also seen this very rapid escalation in the last few years as the Chinese regime remains largely unconfronted and able to get away with these type of behaviors and targeting of women. So we've really seen that they're rapidly carried out with little attempt to veer away from such courses of action that maybe previously might have been deemed necessitating caution on the part of the regime due to potential disapproval by the international community. Unfortunately, China is taking a lot of what's being done as approval. And so the Chinese regime is really using its current status in the world to kind of pull the entire globe back to this really point that echoes of the Cultural Revolution and some of the horrific things that happened there, but it's more technologically enabled at this point. Basically, the Chinese communist regime really fears what it cannot buy or control. And so under Xi Jinping in particular, this moral relativism has been combined with Han ultranationalism. And so as Han Chinese are the main ethnic group in China, and Xi Jinping is striving to define what being Chinese means. This means that for ethnic groups with distinct cultures, it's been disastrous and life was never easy under Chinese rule to begin with. So for women who are attempting to raise their children and live lives with freedom to make their own choices and decisions, this has massive implications. The regime hasn't kept its tyranny confined to its own perceived borders, but rather it has sought to extend its own dictatorial model across the globe and even attempted to control the dialogue at foreign universities and using debt trap diplomacy. So women are effectively caught in the crossfires of this lust for money that threatens to buy out the entire conscience of the world. The Chinese Communist Party's deliberate stoking up of ultranationalism and stereotypes has led to active genocide. And this has been recently affirmed by the United States and in Canadian and Dutch Parliament. But as I said before, we still see that in the response to these brave female survivors who've come forward testifying to rape and other horrific brutalities and the genocide, it's just really preposterous that the Chinese officials should continue to receive an equal platform as a reliable international actor. They are so afraid of the truthful words of women that they have been inclined to slander survivors and victims. The international community often takes a very scholarly, cautious, or even politically correct approach, and we end up downplaying this situation. We should not be watering it down. We should not be being too diplomatic. Genocide and crimes against humanity and this type of awful targeting of women has never been called out too early. And so I want to close by just reminding that the worst case scenario is already happening. So downplaying it may result in slower action. And it sounds very dire, everything that I'm sharing today, but I do believe that we have an opportunity here before it is too late. The world has already failed in a lot of senses. They've already been very slow to respond. But as women in particular, we need to use our power and our voices to stop what is one of the most horrific things happening in the world at present. We don't divide human beings into categories based on race or nationality. We can't say this is happening beyond our borders. We live in a world that is so intertwined that our own complicity and our own mutual responsibility cannot be ignored. So I'm asking today for everyone, let's treat Uyghur women not as someone different from us that we haven't heard of and don't know how to pronounce their name. We may not share their culture and religion, but as someone just like us. The world really can't bear the guilt of silence any longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much for that. So we've heard now from Sister on the realities for Latino immigrants, particularly women from Central America. We've heard of the oppression of Turkish women and the atrocities against Uyghur women. We're going to close out these opening remarks and then move into our questions. But first, we'll hear from our last speaker, Angela Ayez, who is a community teacher who works with adults and youth. Angela is a mom of 9. She converted to Islam 20 years ago and has been working since that time to promote interfaith dialogue. How much that is needed, right, Angela? As a passionate advocate for the poor and as a teacher of Muslim youth, her deepest desire is that Muslim youth understand Islam and live it fully. In her free time, she is a master gardener and avid hiker. She holds an undergraduate degree in psychology. Angela, all yours.
Thank you so much. Peace be upon you. Thank you, Mrs. Cruz. I like to think that I have a particularly vested interest in the topic this evening. Out of those 9 children, 6 of them are daughters, and I want to leave a better world for them. After listening to the terrible events described by the other speakers, I'm going to give you a little bit of hope. I'll now speak to you about the ideal treatment of women prescribed in the Quran and lived out by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Prophet Muhammad was born into an absolutely terrible world for women. Muslims actually call it the age of ignorance. It was a time where women had no rights, where girl children were seen as a curse, and they were often taken out into the desert and buried alive. Women were bought and sold like cattle, and marriage and divorce was completely controlled by men. This is the world that Muhammad was able to completely transform in the short span of a 23-year prophethood. Even before his prophethood, Muhammad was already setting an example in his treatment of women. He married Hatija, a woman who was 15 years his senior, a widow with children, and he remained in a monogamous relationship with her for 25 years until her death. Women in that period, as now, have many roles. And so I'll speak to you about just a few of those roles and how Muhammad, peace be upon him, instructed his followers to treat women. So Prophet Muhammad was, in particular, concerned with the treatment of daughters. In fact, Prophet Muhammad had many children, but only his daughters survived infancy. And when his own daughter Fatima would walk into a room, the Prophet would stand up as a sign of respect and honor for her and call her to sit by his side and chat. He told his followers, if one has a female child and does not bury her alive or slight her or prefer his male children to her, Allah will bring him to paradise, and these daughters will act as a shield for him from hell. What a difference between pre-Islamic times. Girls and women were encouraged to be educated, and the Quran refers to all believers in the first revealed verse, which says, read in the name of your Lord. The Prophet expounded on this principle, and he said, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, something that applies to all genders, all people, all ages, and all times. When female companions would come to the Prophet and make complaints, he would listen to them. Once a female companion came and she said, "O Prophet, you're spending so much time with the male companions that we don't get our equal share." He stood up and said, "You're right." And from that day on, he set aside a day a week to spend only with the female companions, answering their questions directly and providing religious training to them. When he remarried to Aisha, Aisha lived 46 years after his death, and she passed on 2,200 of his sayings called hadith. And these were not only things about his private life, how he lived within a family, but also on major issues like eschatology and inheritance rights. In regards to marriage, Prophet Muhammad changed the whole understanding of the institution in his society. Fathers were now commanded to ask their daughters permission when arranging marriages, and women were free to reject or accept marriage proposals as they pleased. Men were encouraged to marriage for the right reasons. Prophet Muhammad said, "A woman is normally sought after for one of 4 reasons: her wealth, her beauty, her lineage, or her piety. Choose a religious woman and you will prosper. In the whole world, the best provision for you is a pious wife." Women were guaranteed financial rights, including the right to a dowry upon marriage, an amount that they could set and that was solely for them, to be used however they pleased. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad met Hatija while working for her business, and even after their marriage, she continued to run the successful business, and the Prophet was just an assistant to her. Muslim men were commanded to provide all the basic necessities for their wife, including shelter, food, clothing, and companionship. And they were forbidden from accessing any of their wife's earnings. When a man would come to the Prophet Muhammad to complain, the Prophet would caution him, "A believer must not harm his wife. If he dislikes one of her characteristics, he should find another that he is pleased with. The best among you is the best to your wife." The Prophet was the leader of a nation, but he made a point to visit his spouse at night, asking about her needs and simply providing companionship to her. If the Prophet needed to be away or wanted to spend extra time in worship at night, he would first ask his spouse permission. He considered women to be precious, in one case, cautioning the driver of a camel carrying his wife, "Be gentle, for you are carrying precious crystals." The Prophet also elevated the role of motherhood. When a companion came to the Prophet and asked, "Who is the most entitled to the best treatment by me?" the Prophet answered 3 times, "Your mother, your mother, your mother." And only when asked the question a 4th time did he finally mention the father. He declared that paradise lies beneath the feet of mothers and reminded his companions who they owe honor and respect to. In the event that a marriage was unsuccessful, Islam granted many rights to women for separation. A woman was allowed to initiate a divorce with or without cause. When a female companion came to him saying, "I don't blame my husband for any defect in his character or his religion, but I simply cannot endure to live with him," the Prophet ordered the husband to divorce her peacefully. However, if a man wanted to initiate a divorce, there were many restrictions in place. A man could not divorce his wife while she was pregnant. There was a 3-month waiting period for a divorce to be finalized in which the parties could decide to reconcile. During this time, the husband had to continue to provide all the needs of the wife. And even after a divorce, he had to continue to provide for the children, even if the wife remarried. Mistreatment of anyone, woman, child, disabled, slave, is strictly forbidden. The Prophet commanded men about their wives, "Give her food when you take your food, clothe her with what you clothe yourself, do not revile her, and do not beat her." He said, "O Allah, I declare inviolable the rights of the 2 weak ones, the orphans and the women." He cautioned all of the believers, "Beware the prayer of the oppressed, for there is no screen between their invocation and Allah." The Prophet taught that all of humanity, male and female, had rights that could not be violated. He stood up for the oppressed and cautioned his followers over and over to guard the rights of women. In his farewell sermon given shortly before his death, when he knew his time with his community was coming to an end, he dedicated nearly a quarter of the speech to the rights of women, reminding his followers again, as he had throughout his whole prophethood, of women's rights. "O people, your women have rights over you. Do treat your women well and be kind to them, for they are your partners, your committed helpers." If Muhammad's example was followed today, the world would be a much better place for women. An International Women's Day could simply be a day to celebrate the achievements of women, not a day where we need to advocate for basic human rights to be extended to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you so much for those words. So we have some questions from the audience, and I know we're only going to be able to scratch the surface with these questions, but we want to make our way as much as we can with the roughly 15 minutes that we have left. The first question, Angela, I want to stay with you is, this audience member wants to know, they said that you talk about an ideal version of the treatment of women, but as we've heard from other speakers tonight, it's very clear that this ideal is not being reached. What should our response be to this discordance?
So I have a favorite hadith. Hadith is a saying of the Prophet. And at times I wish this wasn't my favorite hadith, that I had never learned it, because it makes my life a little bit more difficult to live. But this hadith says that if you see oppression, stop it with your hand. And if you cannot do that, then stop it with your voice. And if you cannot do even that, then at least hate it with all your heart. So we have to stand up as men, as women, as Julie said, no matter where we are in the world. If we see oppression, we must stand up against it. And this is not always the easy thing to do, right? You know, I have a lot of things to be concerned about in my house. Do I have time to be concerned about the Uyghur? But the truth is, I must be. It is my duty as a member of humanity. And if we followed this, I think the world would be a better place.
Absolutely. Hafza, the next question is for you. We have so many examples like the one in Turkey's case with authoritarian regimes throughout history. Why was the Hizmet movement scapegoated for the coup?
So, yeah, I believe, and also it's a common sense that power holders claim power through different means, such as traditions, religion, ideologies, economics, or other, similar dynamics. And when those in power consolidate more power, it becomes a necessity for them to keep it that way. So even a tiny bit risk or threat should be eliminated. When we come back to our case, Turkey case, the corruption investigation investigation triggered such a threat in 2013. I mean, there was a corruption investigation against the many members of the cabinet, including the son of President Erdogan. The corruption investigation triggered such a threat for the regime in Turkey and all the opposition, not just the political actors, but also the voices of all dissidents, regardless of their affiliations, are targeted to be silenced. This just as I mentioned, dismissals of 130,000 people, arbitrary detentions, confiscations of business, closures of institutions, including educational and other institutions and healthcare services, violence and discrimination against women, tortures in custody and detentions are among the brutal acts of Erdogan government. So the regime needed an enemy to cover up their corruption. The most convenient group or the society, the community seemed to be the Hizmet movement, the Gulen movement, considering the number of the sympathizers, followers, and the organizations these sympathizers once established.
Thank you for that. Can you build a bit more for folks who are tuning in and wanting to know how to support by different means? I know that you've spoken about compassion at different times. Can you please say a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. So those people who are exposed to such a huge purge and violations of real basic rights are once a part of the greater society, as teachers, as business people, as doctors, academics, as housewives, as philanthropists. And all of a sudden, they are thrown under the bus as scapegoats. But no matter what they experience, even the most agitating experiences, they still hope to have a better, future for themselves and for their beloved ones. Hope to survive merges with feeling that there are people who experience more traumatizing conditions and having sort of a gratitude for the tiny positive aspects in our lives, as the exile academic and teacher here. This generates strength, I believe. And in addition to that, I want to reflect on what I feel doing with, along with my friends who do their best to be a voice of the voiceless people, who feel responsibility for the people back in Turkey. Even if newcomers here, as newcomers here in the US, are trying to build up a new life from scratch. And we still continue to be a support for those in Turkey, in Greece, not just in financial terms, but also as being sisters and brothers. You saw as ASD and as the Turkish community here, we both do advocacy for the rights of people back there and also try to meet some, basic urgent needs of them, such as paying their bills, matching the kids with tutors here, helping settle in their new homes if migrated, providing legal support, like finding lawyers and paying these lawyers and so forth. So all these activities require certain financial resources, and we are an NGO, a non-profit organization, operates with donations. What I want to highlight here is that people can support all this work by any means, through donations, through solidarity, through helping with advocacy.
Excellent. The importance of advocacy absolutely underscored here. Thank you so much for that. Julie, one of the questions that we received is about Muslim majority nations and why have they been mostly silent on these issues?
It's a very good question and one that's quite important to understand. And that really is that as it goes for civic societies in Muslim majority countries, they are largely victims themselves of China's massive propaganda campaign. The Chinese regime spends millions on propaganda. It is a very closed off country. Information is heavily censored and there isn't a lot of access even to the region. We've seen the UN has been asking for years to send a delegation in to look, and China keeps responding that it's not a convenient time. Our response to that being, then why is China hosting the 2022 Olympics? If it's not a convenient time for a UN delegation to come, then it doesn't seem it's a convenient time to be hosting genocide games. So we have to remember that because of that and because of the investments with the Belt and Road Initiative in particular, for which the Uyghur homeland is really the strong geopolitical strategic point, with a lot of China's natural resources located there. There's a lot of Muslim majority countries that are effectively have had their silence purchased by their cooperation with the BRI. We can see that Pakistan, unfortunately, right now is effectively colonized by China, with Chinese militarized zones in the country and a lot of human trafficking and other human rights abuses kind of coming along with that. So it's why educating civic society remains a priority for our organization and for many activists, and we hope that we can continue to build and grow awareness.
Excellent. We have a similar question for you, Angela, different side, but many people claim to follow the religion of Islam, but their treatment doesn't match the teachings of Islam. So a lot of curiosity here from the audience. Why do you think that is?
So I think that we have a big issue in the Muslim world of a confusion between culture and religion. And a lot of that is because the people that have been teaching religion for years have all been men. The reality is that men have been translating the Quran, and men have been writing books about hadith, and the women have not had that same opportunity, unfortunately. And so when you are
I think we have lost Angela for a moment, at least. While we wait to see if Angela can reconnect, Julie, let's go back to you. We have another question here on. Oh, and Angela, you're back. We lost you there for a moment.
So sorry. As we are looking at women's rights, I think that one of the best things that we can do is that we need to work to make sure that we are educating our children, that they're learning to understand Quran, to understand the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad for themselves, to read those for themselves in a language that they understand, and that they will not have their decisions for them based on someone in another country with another culture, but they will be learning for themselves.
Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
Julie, back to you. So we have one more question with what you were describing and what should be done by women's organizations and feminist allies to address the genocide.
We really hope to just see that the voices of victims and those who have the truth are amplified and magnified. I think it's been very disappointing to see a lot of countries and scholars and organizations buy right into China's version of the narrative, which has switched multiple times at this head-turning rate. Initially, they said the camps didn't exist. Then when satellite imagery proved that they did, they changed their tune and said these are vocational training schools. And when leaked documents showed that these schools had handcuffs and pepper spray and guard towers and things you don't use in a school, then the narrative changed to be mind your own business. This is China's internal affair. We're fighting extremism. And when that was pushed back on as the initial people to be arrested were academics, scholars, people that you target first with the genocide, they switched the narrative to everything is fine, everyone's graduated, everybody's happy. So with this constant switching of the narrative, we just hope to see that this is pushed back upon. We need to demand action from our leaders, and we hope that women would be leading the charge, particularly as women have been the ones largely that have been so bold and brave and raising their voices as these victims have come forward and shared things that are culturally very difficult to share because of the shame-based culture, because of the pain and trauma that's associated with the types of things these women have gone through. And so it should be the responsibility and indeed the honor of the international community to defend these women against these horrific attacks by the Chinese Foreign Ministry and to really push for further action and to stop active genocide.
Thank you, Julie. Our last question that we're going to have time for here today is for you, sister. And I just want to frame this question with, what we're talking about here are oppressive rulers and systems, right? We've heard a lot about systems and systems that can help solve it, whether it's NGOs or women who are mobilized and advocated. And I want to distinguish between these people, the public, the community, and these systems, these regimes that have been oppressive. Now, the question that we have is actually about the US and bringing it back home to what can be done here and as it relates to American society and how we can help immigrants as they adjust and integrate into our society, recognizing we have some of our own systems to reckon with and some of our own realities. So if you don't mind, sister, tying this all together and addressing that point.
Betty, that certainly is true. We do have problems here with our systems, But one of the things that I find is that with the immigrants coming in, there really is a desire on the part of the people to help to integrate. Exactly how to do that? Well, helping to educate is really one of the most powerful things that can be done for women. And not just educate in terms of, well, teach them English and teach them civics and all this kind of stuff, but also to empower them and to help them to know that, yes, you can do it. You are able. And, you know, I find great solace in some of the possibilities, for example, that we have here in Pittsburgh, you know, with the Turkish Cultural Center, who have done so much for those immigrants who are coming from the Erdogan regime and the women who have been oppressed, with everyone, all of the asylum seekers. Also here we have grown up a number of organizations, Casa San Jose, which was really instituted primarily by the Sisters of St. Joseph, does a wonderful job of helping Hispanics to enculturate. It helps them with so many different things, education, but also accompanying them to get their Social Security cards, accompanying them to school to help with their kids, with so many areas of life. AJAPO, which really also has government funding and support and is helping immigrants from Africa and the Caribbean. And it goes beyond even helping them to get clothing and housing and food. ANSAR, which is a relatively new group, a 501c3, which is working with Islamic immigrants, helping them also to establish themselves, to get housing, to furnish their housing, to get food, to work with their kids in school. And of course, the Jewish Family Center that does all of these things and also provides the legal. So there are many organizations helping to continue to fund them, to continue to support them, to realize that goods that you have maybe at home can be used by people that are immigrants and funneled through these organizations. Maybe it's a real positive, hopeful thing that we see happening. Of course, more needs to be done. We're not finished, but with the help of the Lord, with the help of good people and good volunteers and good advocates, as Julie and Asna and Angela have mentioned, and you too, Betty, things really can change.
Hear, hear. There's definitely much work to be done, and
Yes.
all of you are such an inspiration, and we've learned so much here today. And as Angela said early on, right, it's on us to lead with compassionate action, and to follow the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the many lessons that have been shared here. So whether it's, as the sister opened up talking about, even gender equity in pay is something that we're still dealing with, or whether we're talking about genocides, the severity is real, and there are many ways for anyone who's tuning in to this program to advocate, to donate, to volunteer, to serve, and to help move us forward. Thank you all for such a wonderful conversation here today. Thank you again to City of Bridges Foundation, to everyone who's watching, again to our amazing panel. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and really take care of one another. Celebrate women every day. Happy International Women's Day to all of you. Take good care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And good evening.